This is my favorite shot from one of my favorite movies by one of my favorite directors. It's simple, a person walking left to right, but in the hands of Kiyoshi Kurosawa, it becomes something uncanny. And the crazy part is that he's been repeating this gesture for nearly 40 years. Kurosawa is best known for his horror films like Cure and Pulse, movies that seep deep under your skin. But what makes him extraordinary is that his prolific career, beginning in Japanese television to now being a beacon of filmmaking worldwide, stretches far beyond horror and touches deeply into the human condition no matter what genre he's attacking. He's made family dramas, crime thrillers, sci-fi epics, even romance, all while sneaking in the same dreadful unease that he's so notorious for. Across 30 films, you start to feel a pattern. Loneliness, isolation, the collapse of ordinary life into something terrifying. That's what makes him not just Japan's greatest horror director, but one of the most fascinating filmmakers working today. So we're going through them all, every single Kiyoshi Kurosawa movie, until we find the one that stands above the rest. Watching all of these movies obviously took a really long time, so I hope you enjoy the video. Spoiler warning for all of Kiyoshi Kurosawa's movies, but without further ado, let's get right into the rankings. Rounding out the bottom of our rankings, coming in at number 28 and 27, we have two works from the early days of Kurosawa as a filmmaker, namely Kandagawa Pervert Wars and Bumpkin Soup. Kurosawa's debut feature was made while he was still a student at Rikyo University. It is as chaotic and unorthodox as the title might suggest. It's a low-budget mixture of erotic comedy and absurdist mystery, centered around a group of college kids who are spying on their neighbors from across the river. While there's so much inventive playfulness with the camera and the performances, ultimately this movie is a debut feature and it's pretty rough around the edges. Not to mention that out of its 60-minute runtime, about 20 minutes of the film is dedicated to pretty much just sex or pornography. In fact, the only way I was able to watch this film was on some weird Russian porn site. It was pretty hard to convince myself that what I was doing was work when I sat down to watch this. And despite seeing a lot of trends and unique flourishes that Kurosawa would later adopt in his later works, this film is ultimately pretty thin when it comes to entertainment, ideas, and just overall enjoyability. Similar things can be said for number 27, Bumpkin Soup, which also centers around a group of college students and is also equally or semi-less equally perverted. It's definitely more advanced in terms of style and formal film elements, but it's a pretty sophomore-ish feature film. Like his debut, it's rough around the edges, inventive and playful, but it's ultimately not something I would ever choose to rewatch apart from maybe having some research interest in it. The last thing I'll say about these two movies is that they don't really have any of the trademark Kurosawa horror or dread that you see in his frames. But despite the lack of that feeling, they're still framed in a very similar way. And it was watching this movies that I realized there's a lot of similarities between Kurosawa and Wes Anderson in terms of blocking, performances, and just where he puts the camera. It's often symmetrical, flat, characters delivering wooden or monotone performances. The only difference is that Kurosawa matured into more horror and drama, whereas Wes Anderson matured into pastiche. On to number 26, Sweet Home. Sweet Home stands out in Kurosawa's filmography as both a haunted house horror and a strange piece of gaming history. The film follows a television crew who enter an abandoned mansion to restore the paintings of a reclusive artist. Once inside, they discover that the house is cursed by a tragic past and a vengeful spirit begins to pick them off one by one. With its mix of practical gore effects, crumbling gothic architecture, and ghostly apparitions, the film plays as a classic late 80s horror showcase. But what makes this movie particularly notable is its connection to gaming history. The companion Sweet Home game to this film directly inspired the creation of the Resident Evil series. While it is Kurosawa's first venture into the horror genre, it definitely is not his most successful. Like a lot of other 80s horror movies, it's a lot goofier and less thematically dense than his later works. It's a fun time and maybe something worth revisiting. It has a pretty cool third act with this giant monster creature thing. This film is a lesser work and probably something that Kurosawa fans don't necessarily need to seek out unless they're completionists. At number 25, we have The Guard from Underground. I would argue this film is when you really start to see Kurosawa's style and interests begin to materialize. It's a lot more interested in vocation and relationships than the previous other films, while still blending a mixture of eerie, supernatural, and very practical and real horror. The film follows a newly hired curator in a museum/art gallery place that buys paintings and sells them for more money. And their building begins to be haunted or tormented by a ex-sumo wrestler turned mass murderer slasher killer. But what I really liked about this movie is the way it portrayed modern office work, even in an industry that's meant to be creative and perhaps more interesting like art curation. To me, that conflict of interest is such a Kurosawa theme that is present in so many of his other movies, and it was really interesting to see it materialize in some of his earlier, perhaps less refined works. Out of these first 4 movies, which I kind of grouped together on the lowest tier, The Guard from Underground is the highest of them because it's probably the one I'd be most interested in revisiting. Coming in at number 24, we have Seventh Code. From this point on in Kurosawa's body of work, every single movie is good, and it really comes down to personal preference. For me, that includes how entertaining, scary, thematically interesting, and perhaps the most objective of all, how important the movie feels. And so at the bottom of these Kurosawa movies that I would just consider objectively good, we have Seventh Code. Seventh Code follows Akiko, a young Japanese woman who travels to Vladivostok in Russia to track down a man she briefly met in Tokyo. Her pursuit quickly leads her into danger, entangling her with criminals, betrayals, and the struggle to survive in a foreign land. Seventh Code is unique from Kurosawa's other works because it moves at a much more brisk pace. It's also only 60 minutes long and has a lot more action than any of his other movies, apart from perhaps Cloud, which we'll be talking about much later. But what didn't work for me, which funnily enough works with a lot of other Kurosawa movies, is its looseness. It has a main thread of her tracking down this man and eventually uncovering this weird nuclear bomb plot, but that entire MacGuffin motivation felt a little bit superfluous, and it didn't feel like Kurosawa was actually interested in that idea, and it was kind of just an excuse for him to showcase hand-to-hand action that he had perhaps been wanting to do for a while, and work with this singer, songwriter, and eventually acting partner that he uses in so many other of his movies. At number 23, we have another short film of Kurosawa, House of Bugs. This movie was a part of an anthology dedicated to Kazuo Umezu, who is this horror manga artist, and Kurosawa was assigned with creating the first film in that anthology, House of Bugs. It's a compact psychological chamber piece that uses horror as a metaphor for marital collapse. The story follows a couple whose seemingly stable relationship begins to fracture, and how private grievances manifest into surreal, insect-like imagery that take over the house. Like Seventh Code, what I liked about this movie was its swiftness, right? It's less than an hour long, and while it isn't necessarily action-heavy, this movie is definitely idea-heavy and visually metaphor-heavy. There's a lot that you can take from this film in terms of ideas about relationships, about what we owe each other, about how we hurt each other, but I think what holds this back from being one of Kurosawa's great movies is one, that it's never actually scary, and two, it's a little bit unsubtle with what it's trying to say through these visual metaphors. Nevertheless, it's still a great time, and watching a massive spider walk down the stairs is something that I did not know that I needed to see. That part actually did wrench my stomach, did drop it all the way down to the floor. So I guess it does have one pretty good scare. At 22, we have Loft. To me, the worst of the full-length feature film Kurosawa horror movies. Like so many of his other works, it intertwines supernatural horror with personal anxiety, in this case, artistic anxiety. A novelist retreats to a secluded countryside house to work on her latest book, but soon discovers that the building has a chilling history. An archaeologist living nearby has unearthed an ancient mummy, and the house may be harboring restless spirits of its own. As the novelist's isolation deepens, she becomes caught between creative paralysis and ghostly disturbances, unsure whether the horrors she encounters are external or born of her own unraveling mind. To me, what set this back from Kurosawa's other horror films was the relationship between the novelist and the archaeologist. their relationship together never really felt developed, more so like it was strung along haphazardly just to follow the arc of the plot, which unfortunately depends heavily on the strength of their relationship. And while it has an eerie supernatural dread that's so famous in Kurosawa movies, there wasn't really anything else that I personally felt that would separate it from his other works. That isn't to say this movie is bad. Like I mentioned, all the movies from Seventh Code up I would consider as objectively good. There was just something missing from this movie that made it feel flat. Regardless, that ending was pretty bonkers and pretty much worth watching the whole film, so give it a watch, and give it a watch. Coming in at number 21, we have a movie that's unlike any other Kurosawa film, which is Wife of a Spy. Wife of a Spy finds Kurosawa turning out a historical epic in the vein of a Hitchcockian thriller. The film follows Satoko, the wife of a merchant who may be secretly smuggling evidence of Japanese war crimes to the Allies. Torn between loyalty to her husband and suspicion of his activities, she becomes ensnared in a web of intrigue, deception, and shifting allegiances. Kurosawa stages the drama with cool detachment, emphasizing quiet betrayals and subtle shifts in trust rather than overt spectacle. The result is a suspense film where danger lurks not in gunfights or explosions, but in conversations, glances, and the slight weight of history. What makes this movie so unlike Kurosawa's other works is, one, that it is a period piece, which he doesn't really ever do, and two, it's purely a historical drama, another type of genre that he never really tackles. And so I wonder what inspired him to make the decision to make this movie. I know he's from Kobe and this film is set in Kobe, so perhaps there was some interest in returning to something from where he was from, but the movie itself is really entertaining and actually quite interesting. It deals with a complicated issue in Japan's past, the relationship between the love of your country and doing the right thing. And while there's so much to love about this movie, I think the fact that Kurosawa is so untrained in doing something like a period piece in a historical drama, it made the movie feel a little bit flimsy when compared to other great period pieces. When I say that, I mean, I just never believed that this movie was actually set in 1940s Kobe. I don't want to be too harsh on it, but it kind of had the look of a commercial where everything felt too clean, the costumes looked like they were fresh from the store, and it just didn't have that tactile realness that I associate with Kurosawa's movies. Coming in at number 20 and 19, we have two other movies that are sort of outliers in Kurosawa's body of work. Journey to the Shore and To the Ends of the Earth are both movies about finding yourself or finding something in places that you're not used to being in. Journey to the Shore centers around a lost romance between a wife and a husband who has passed as they visit these small towns in Japan and reconcile with a past/trauma that was once corrupted. To the Ends of the Earth, on the other hand, is about breaking free or trying to find freedom from a job, life, or situation that feels entrapped. A variety show reporter in Uzbekistan portrays this character that she truly isn't. She finds more to relate to in a goat that's trapped in a cage than to her producers and assistants that are helping her produce this show. I lumped these two films together because they felt pretty thematically related. And while Kurosawa often ventures into drama, these two felt a little bit distinct from his other works because they don't have that trademark dread. In fact, they're a lot more full of life and compassion than I was probably used to. There are moments in each film that made me very emotional, to say the least. I suppose the issue, or not really issue, that I had with these two movies is just that they didn't feel like they were something that Kurosawa had to say. And maybe it's just that these last three movies aren't exactly my cup of tea. But I think there's something else in his other works that just touched me in a way that those last three movies don't exactly do. Coming in at number 18, we have the movie Real. Now, Real is a movie that I probably could have put a lot higher on my personal list. It's sitting here at number 18, but I think maybe on any given day I could put it at number 10. It blends sci-fi, horror, and romance kind of perfectly. It follows a husband who enters into his wife's mind because she is in a coma because she jumped into the ocean trying to end her own life. Inside these dreams, he sees visions of the horror, ghostly, disgusting, brutal manga art that she draws. And every single time one of these is on screen, it was absolutely terrifying. But beyond that effective use of horror, the relationships in this movie are so well written and so well done. You can really feel the yearning and futility that the husband feels when trying to wake his wife up from the coma that she's in. And there's a twist around 2/3 of the way into the movie that I did not necessarily see coming, screen that really opened it up to me and I think made me love it that much more. I love the way it explored the past and memory and how that continues to haunt us. It's not like one of those, modern day 24 movies that's like, oh, a trauma. But it's genuinely like exploring the past in these dreams and going to the places where you lived when you were a child, and feelings of nostalgia, feelings like you can't, go back to the past, and having that coupled with the horror and the sci-fi and the crazy third act battle between the husband and wife and a giant sea monster made me just really like it. At number 17, we have Eyes of the Spider. And now, I wasn't initially gonna review this movie as well as Serpent's Path, which I'm reviewing later, because they were both made-for-TV movies that Kurosawa made back in the day in the 90s. But they are just so well made and so appreciated that I couldn't leave them off this list. Eye of the Spider is a stripped-down Yakuza thriller. The story follows a man who, after finding and torturing the man who killed his daughter, finds himself reconnected with an old friend from high school who brings him deep into the criminal underworld. What sets this film apart from what you might assume this movie actually is based off the synopsis is Kurosawa's restraint. The violence isn't glorified, it's all shot from a distance. The whole movie feels cold and calculated, and for being a movie that he made so early on in his career, it's remarkably sharp and smart. This movie foreshadows Kurosawa's lifelong interest in cycles of violence and the erosion of the human spirit and morality as you fall deeper and deeper into those cycles. And while it isn't necessarily as overtly allegorical or metaphorical or deep as his later works, it's still just so dang entertaining and fun to watch and sharp, like I mentioned, that I had to put it this high up on the list. At number 16, we have a film, Barren Illusion. And this was actually a movie I was initially considering putting a lot lower. But the reason it's sitting here at 16 on the upper half of the rankings is that it lingered with me. No matter how potentially boring it was when I first watched it, there's something about this movie that just sticks with you, and recall the feeling that you had while watching it as you go about your day-to-day life. The way the protagonists fade in and out of existence as they sit around an empty room watching life pass them by. Perhaps it's just that I'm at a similar point in my life as the characters in the movie, but there's something that's hard to describe that is really felt in this film. Two characters are in love because they don't really have anything else to do. The girl dreams about going to distant lands but never does. The guy dreams about disappearing completely. I think the title of the film accurately reflects what this movie is about: life as a barren illusion. This movie might not be for you. There's not really any dialogue. There's not really much of a MacGuffin or a central thread that's driving the movie along. It's very dreamlike and atmospheric and kind of sad. But if you're into that, or if you're in a similar space or time in your life as the characters in this movie, I think it can be a really enriching watch. Because it's one of the best examples of Kurosawa's ability to explore modern life and the alienation of it, something that I think he is just a master at doing. Okay, at number 15, we have the movie Doppelganger. In a way, Doppelganger reminds me of those first four movies from Kurosawa's foray into filmmaking. Because it's scary, has an interesting concept, and is also pretty goofy. It follows a meek scientist working on an experimental medical device who finds himself and his life upended when his exact double appears. At first, the doppelganger seems like a liberating force, bold, assertive, unafraid, everything the scientist is not. But as the double begins taking over his work and relationships, and even his identity, the boundaries between self and other collapse into paranoia and chaos. Kurosawa balances psychological horror with dark comedy, pushing the absurdity of watching one's better or perhaps worse self run rampant. So of course, when you have a movie that features two Koji Yakusho performances, it's gonna be pretty good. Kurosawa's most famous collaborator. He is amazing in this film, and he plays two completely different characters that are meant to be foils of one another. The shadow self and the id, or the psychological Freud, I have no idea what. It lays out a very simple philosophical idea. Who/what are the two selves inside of us? Our conscious/subconscious, our shadow, how we perform our persona in real life versus what we truly want and desire to do. That, coupled with the physical metaphor of creating this medical device that lets you perform the human functions that your brain desires without having to put on an outward persona. I just think there's a lot of meat on this bone to chew on while still being a wildly absurd, funny, thrilling, scary movie. Just a Kurosawa banger in all fashions, all facets. The next two movies we're going to be looking at are actually pretty interesting because they are an original and a remake of the same film. Serpent's Path from 1998 and Serpent's Path from 2024. The films have identical stories. They are both tales of vengeance, following two men in the original and a man and a woman in the remake who kidnap someone and subject them to brutal questioning, demanding answers about the death of a young girl, the daughter of the man who is brutalizing them. As their interrogations continue, layers of lies and betrayals emerge, and it becomes clear that the truth is far murkier than either anticipated. Kurosawa frames the story in stark, unadorned settings. Parking lots, warehouses, barren rooms, stripping the revenge narrative to its raw, ugly core. Violence here is an exhausting, endless cycle that consumes everyone caught up in its path. By the time the film reaches its conclusion, vengeance feels less like justice and more like a self-destructive compulsion. Both movies are dark, cold, and unsparing examinations of how violence perpetuates itself. Like Eyes of the Spider, these are violent thrillers that are incredibly clean, and despite having murky plots, are incredibly succinct with what they are trying to say about the cycle of violence. The only reason I have the 1998 version of Serpent's Path above the 2024 is one, its brevity. It's only 85 minutes long, whereas the 2024 version is 2 hours. And two, the performance of Teruyuki Kagawa. To me, he has so much more weight and screen presence than his French counterpart, who plays more a sniveling buffoon who doesn't really know what to do or what's going on. While Kagawa's character is still in that same exact scenario, when he's on screen, he just brings so much authority to it, and he's a lot more interesting to watch. He's also one of Kurosawa's frequent collaborators. He'll show up near the top of this list. Spoiler, I would be inclined to rewatch both of these movies, and if you're a fan of someone like David Fincher, movies like Seven or Zodiac, I guarantee you will love both of these films. At number 12, we have another French film by the Japanese director, Daguerreotype. Kurosawa's first French-language film, Daguerreotype trades Japanese urban landscapes for a Gothic mansion steeped in history and decay. The story follows Stéphane, a reclusive photographer obsessed with daguerreotypes, long exposure images that require his daughter to sit motionless for hours, as if she were a living ghost. A young assistant becomes drawn into this suffocating world, caught between art, obsession, and the daughter's quiet yearning for freedom. Kurosawa crafts the film with a painterly slowness, emphasizing mood over plot. The house creaks with memories, the images capture not just faces but time itself, and the lines between the living and the dead blurs with each photograph taken. While less overtly horrific, the film is drenched in atmosphere, an exploration of how art can preserve but also imprison. It's a ghost story not about apparitions, but about the suffocating weight of the past. The only knock I can put on this film is that the twist that happens in the very last couple minutes is incredibly predictable from about the 30-minute mark. The fact that I just said that hopefully won't actually spoil the film for you when you watch it for yourself, because it really is that obvious when it happens. That doesn't make the idea of the film any less relevant, because holding on to that obsession or that image of the past is exactly what this movie is about, even when it is so obviously not real. This movie also has a very similar scare to the ultra famous one of Pulse, and I wonder if that was Kurosawa kind of pointing his finger back at his previous work. Speaking of Pulse, it is coming in at number 11. Now, I know a lot of you are probably like, what? Pulse is only 11? What are you talking about? Your list is invalid. All your other points are moot because Pulse is clearly a top 3 Kurosawa movie. No. You guys need to watch more freaking movies. Oh my god. Did you not see the last 20 minutes of Pulse where the whole movie like falls apart and takes a shit on itself? Where the terrible CGI plane falls out of the sky and everybody's gone for no... Listen, the last few minutes of Pulse are not good, guys. They're not good. Pulse is a really great movie, all right? It has that famous scene, you know? I'm not trying to knock it, but I'm just trying to say, like, let's be honest here. There are other good movies too. Hey, we don't need to hold on to that YouTube video. Pulse is Kurosawa's most famous horror film. It is a vision of technological dread that feels even more prophetic today. The film begins with the discovery of a mysterious website set to connect the living with the dead. Soon, ghosts begin appearing in the shadows of Tokyo, but rather than attacking, they exude a suffocating despair that drives people to vanish, leaving only dark stains behind. Kurosawa weaves together two storylines: a woman disturbed by her coworker's suicide and a student drawn into the spreading phenomenon, until Tokyo itself feels hollowed out by isolation. The first 2/3 of Pulse really are masterful. Despite being over 20 years old, it is still a relevant ghost story for the modern age. Reflections upon isolation and despair intertwined with advancements in technology. Ideas that Kurosawa is constantly exploring, but here in 2002, he perhaps did it in the best way that he ever did. But nothing is gonna take away from the last weird-ass 20 minutes, all right? I'm sorry, it has to be number 11. Coming in at number 10, we have a ghost story relatively similar to Pulse, but I think just a little bit cleaner. We have Retribution. To me, Retribution is a blend of Pulse and Cure. Retribution begins with a murder. A woman in a red coat found drowned in a pool of salt water. Detective Yoshioka takes on the case, only to find himself haunted by a ghostly figure who seems to accuse him directly. As the investigation unfolds, he becomes entangled in a web of guilt, memory, and corruption that erodes the boundary between the living and the dead. Kurosawa drenches the film in water imagery, creating an atmosphere of decay and unease. More than just a ghost story, Retribution is about the weight of personal and collective sins, and about how the past refuses to stay buried. The haunting is as much psychological as supernatural, leaving Yoshioka and the audience unsure whether the specter is real or an externalization of his consciousness. I think what I love so much about Retribution is that there aren't really many flaws you can point to it. Maybe Koji hams it up a little bit towards the beginning. Maybe the twist isn't exactly as aha as it would have liked to be. I'm not trying to call the movie flawless, but it is purely Kurosawa in his bag, pulling out all the tricks, all the stops. It even has a very similar Pulse/Daguerreotype scare where the woman in red slowly moves towards the camera. This film is haunting, its ideas are dense, and its only flaw is that it doesn't transcend his other works. While perhaps the highs of Pulse are higher than in Retribution, there's just no glaring flaw that detracts from it. And for that reason, I'd probably be more inclined to finish watching Retribution than a movie like Pulse. Coming in at number 9, we have a alien invasion movie, Before We Vanish. In Before We Vanish, Kurosawa blends science fiction and human drama into a fable about what it means to be human. The story follows 3 alien invaders who inhabit human bodies as part of a larger plan to conquer Earth. To prepare, they begin stealing abstract concepts: family, possession, love, leaving their victims strangely hollow. But one alien, inhabiting the body of a young man, forms an unexpected bond with his wife, leading to a strange and tender exploration of love in the face of annihilation. While the premise suggests invasion and violence, Kurosawa stages much of the film with a surprising gentleness, emphasizing conversations and connection over spectacle. It's a story less about destruction than about discovery. Discovery about how fragile and profound human relationships appear when stripped to their essence. In its own way, it's one of Kurosawa's most hopeful films. While there are other movies that explore what it means to be human, that delve deep into profound feelings of loneliness, hope, despair, I don't think there is a single other movie that Kurosawa made that is as touching and interested in tenderness as Before We Vanish. While you can take the aliens literally, or you can view them as a metaphor for the internet, technology, the advancement of capitalism, whatever the hell you want, the film essentially boils down to understanding and appreciating love. And for a director that's so famous for his horror films, I wasn't really expecting that. I don't really have much more to say about this movie, besides maybe if you're someone that wants to feel good, but good in a complicated way, definitely go watch Before We Vanish. Coming in at number 8, we have another detective story, Charisma. In Charisma, a detective recovering from trauma wanders into a forest where a single tree has become the center of a fierce local conflict. Some believe it must be preserved at all costs, others insist it must be destroyed, and still others see it as meaningless. The detective, caught between factions, struggles to make sense of the passion surrounding this strange natural anomaly. Kurosawa shoots the forest like a dreamscape, a place both serene and threatening, where human motives blur and morality becomes unstable. Charisma resists easy interpretation. Is the tree a metaphor for ecological collapse, for individualism, for moral corruption, or is it just a tree, and the madness lies entirely on us? By presenting the mystery without resolution, Kurosawa creates one of his most allegorical works, a story about obsession, balance, and the dangerous need to impose meaning where none may exist. Something else that I love so much about this movie is its rejection of the idea that the natural world somehow makes more sense than the world in a city. The detective, who's from Tokyo, feels that way. He's thrust into more confusion, obsession, and human arrogance than he had previously ever experienced living in Tokyo. I must admit, when I first saw this movie, it was kind of a lot for me to take in, and I couldn't really quite grasp it. I had to do a little bit of reading some other reviews, or journals, and essays on this film before I could truly appreciate it for what it is. And what it is something like the movie Burning, maybe. Something that you can watch, understand, and still be entertained by, but always be confronted by questions of motivation, character, and that strange feeling of not knowing what is really happening. At number 7, we have another action movie, which just came out last year, a movie that I really loved, Cloud. Yoshi, a young factory worker in Tokyo, supplements his daily grind by reselling goods online under a pseudonym, Rattel, flipping medical devices, designer knockoffs, and collectibles for profit. But soon his side hustle becomes full-time. He quits the factory job, hires an assistant, and moves with his girlfriend Akiko into a larger suburban house that also doubles as a warehouse. As Yoshi's profits grow, so does his moral detachment. His focus narrows to money, hustle, and expanding operations. But the cracks begin to appear. Disgruntled customers, deceitful suppliers, and anonymous critics online start to retaliate. Strange, sinister incidents intrude on his new life, threatening messages, menacing strangers, and a growing sense that someone is watching and waiting. What starts as a sharp satirical portrait of e-commerce greed slowly transforms into a tense thriller. Kurosawa ratchets up the dread with home invasions, retaliation, and escalated violence to the point where Yoshi's ambitions and misdeeds catch up with him in devastating and morally ambiguous ways. This comparison might not be totally accurate, but the movie that Cloud perhaps most reminds me of is Eddington, which just came out this year. Both of them are accurate portrayals or portraits of what it feels like to live in this modern age, coming from two different perspectives. One, of course, being the American perspective, and Cloud coming from a Japanese perspective. How digital life and digital capitalism narrows our point of view and alienation into one that focuses entirely on individual gain. With that backdrop, Cloud comes at you with some of the funniest and craziest action, well, it's not the craziest action, entertaining action that Kurosawa has ever put to screen. The movie is genuinely thrilling and at times terrifying, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time watching. My appraisal of the film might be swayed a little bit because I was able to watch it at the Los Angeles premiere, I'm pretty sure, where Kurosawa gave us a welcome message. It was actually really funny. He said, you guys being Americans should be good judges of this film because this is an entertainment film, and Americans being the masters of entertainment films should be the best judges at it. It was like, wow, what a backhanded compliment. At number 6, we have Bright Future. This film captures a restless sense of disillusionment among Japan's youth at the turn of the millennium. The story follows two listless young men, Yuji and Mamoru, whose lives spiral after a violent crime binds them together. Mamoru leaves behind a pet jellyfish, poisonous, beautiful, and oddly captivating, which Yuji attempts to care for even as his own life drifts aimlessly. The jellyfish becomes a symbol of alienation and dangerous beauty, reflecting the young men's uncertain place in society. Kurosawa films Tokyo as a concrete wasteland, where generational divides deepen and hope feels elusive. Yet, amid the bleakness, there are moments of tenderness, small gestures of connection that hint at possibilities beyond despair. It's a film about growing up in a world that no longer seems to want you, and the longing to carve out a place, however fragile, in an indifferent future. The movie also gestures toward the clash between traditional values and a more modern rejection of them. One scene in particular was at once the saddest and most hilarious scene I'd ever seen in a Kurosawa film. This guy, Yuji, spends like 3 hours a day at an arcade doing nothing but this one game. But when he brings his sister's boyfriend to the arcade to play with him, he can't beat the guy in a single game. Like, wow, despite spending your whole day wasting away at the arcade, you still can't beat this guy who, mind you, has a more traditional career path, has his life seemingly put together. And while that scene is deeply sad, there's also something about it that's incredibly hilarious. This movie, like Barren Illusion, might be a little bit abstract and slow for some, but what Barren Illusion might lack in terms of story, dialogue, and just overall sense of what is going on, this movie is rich in character, relationships, and emotion, making it a much more enjoyable watch for a movie that's interested in a lot of the same themes and ideas. Coming in at number 5, we have arguably Kurosawa's greatest straight-up horror movie, Creepy. That man is not my father. He's a total stranger. Part police procedural, part domestic horror, Creepy finds Kurosawa returning to his roots with chilling precision. The film follows a retired detective who moves into a quiet suburban neighborhood with his wife, but one of their neighbors is off. He's overly familiar one moment and menacingly distant the next, and soon the couple begins to suspect he's hiding something much darker. At the same time, the detective is drawn back into a missing persons case that seems to connect disturbingly close to home. Kurosawa wrings dread out of the ordinary, transforming sunny backyards and polite small talk into spaces of suffocating menace. More than a horror movie, the film is a study of trust and control, how evil can worm its way not just into a community, but into the bonds of marriage and family. By the end, the words creepy feel less like a description than a state of being. What makes Creepy work so well are the two lead performances by Teruyuki Kagawa. Nishijima is so good at playing that stoic, stern detective who is on his last thread, and Kagawa delivers one of the most chilling, disturbing performances I've ever seen in any movie. Something about his look is just so menacing, so disturbing, so creepy, that anytime he's on screen, I just felt absolutely uncomfortable. What I found remarkable about this movie, more so than perhaps any other Kurosawa movie, is just how watchable it is. I know that's kind of a lame compliment to give at a top 5 Kurosawa movie, because of course all of his movies are watchable, but I was just so lost in the reality of this story that when it ended, I was almost at a loss for words because I had completely forgotten that I was watching a movie to begin with. If you came to this video just looking for a really good horror movie to watch, I would absolutely start with this movie, Creepy. It just does what the title says it's gonna do. The only reason this isn't number 1 on this list is, well, obviously just personal preference, but more so due to the fact that it doesn't really have any greater ambitions than just making a really clean, really good, really entertaining, creepy movie. At number 4, we have a perhaps controversial pick, License to Live. To me, License to Live, Bright Future, and Barren Illusion form a kind of trilogy of Kurosawa's. The disenfranchised youth in turn-of-the-century Tokyo who feel alienated, helpless, but ultimately are trying to make the most out of a bleak society that doesn't really seem to care for them. And for my money, License to Live is the best out of those 3. After spending 10 years in a coma, a young man named Yutaka wakes up to a world that has moved on without him. With the mind of a child trapped in an adult body, he tries to rebuild his life, opening a fish farm, reconnecting with his estranged parents, and chasing a sense of belonging that always seems just out of reach. Kurosawa balances gentle comedy with deep sadness, portraying Yutaka as both endearing and tragic. His innocence is refreshing, but it also isolates him in a society that no longer has room for his naivete. What could have been a simple oddball story becomes, in Kurosawa's hands, a moving reflection on time, memory, and the impossibility of recapturing what's lost. License to Live is less about answers than about drifting, about searching for meaning when life has already slipped away. I believe the one scene that captures this movie better than any other comes near the end, when the man who brought Yutaka into a coma by hitting him with a car back in the day shows up one night to destroy everything that he has built since waking up. His dude ranch, his milk bar, his stable with a horse, that man shows up to tear it all down. Yutaka manages to stop him, but upon realizing that this new world that he stumbled upon is never gonna make time for him to catch up, he grabs the chainsaw and tears it all down himself. That one particular moment might be the saddest in all of Kurosawa's films. It was a real gut punch to me, and that coupled with the ending of this movie, which is just so random and so haphazard, yet so real. There was just something so emotionally wrenching about this movie that maybe I can't quite put my finger on, that still made me admire, appreciate, and love it so very much. And now here we have it. We're at the precipice. The big 3, you might say. I wonder what order they're gonna go in. At number 3, we have Tokyo Sonata. At first glance, Tokyo Sonata seems like a domestic drama rather than a horror film, but Kurosawa applies the same meticulous unease to a story about a family in crisis. When a middle-aged father loses his job, he hides the truth from his wife and children, unable to bear the shame. His silence creates fractures that ripple through the household. His wife feels increasingly alienated, his eldest son embraces reckless independence, and his youngest secretly pursues a life in music that his father doesn't understand. Kurosawa films these tensions with the same eerie patience he gives his thrillers. Long takes, empty spaces, pauses filled with quiet dread. The horror here is not the supernatural, but social. The collapse of dignity, trust, communication, and the family. But beneath it all, the suffocating melancholy, there is fragile hope that even broken families can find ways to start again. Tokyo Sonata to me is like Kurosawa trying to make a Baumbach movie. While his other dramas feel more ethereal, are interested in isolation, this movie is very traditional in how it's framed. And I think that just makes it that much more digestible and enjoyable for someone like me who grew up on American movies. Because of its diverse array of characters, all of them fleshed out and interesting, there's something for everybody to latch on and relate to. And unlike his trilogy of despair, License to Live, Bright Future, Barren Illusion, I did appreciate that this film does end on a relatively hopeful note. The idea that maybe through it all, through all of this turmoil, all this changes in modern life, we can still find each other, we can still love, we can still have a family. This movie ultimately might be a little bit conservative in that worldview, but there's still something that's nice and hopeful about it. But now we're on to the moment you've all been waiting for. If you know me, you know that Chime is one of my favorite movies, right? I'm constantly talking about it, bringing it up in multiple videos, but let's be honest, it's not the best Kurosawa movie. So coming in at number 2, we have Chime. You actually thought I wouldn't have it number 1. Number 2 is Cure, okay? Number 2 is Cure. Look, I'm not gonna make this segment about why Cure falls short. Cure is a 5-star masterpiece. Often regarded as Kurosawa's greatest work, Cure is less a crime thriller than an autopsy of the human soul. Tokyo is paralyzed by a series of random murders, each committed by ordinary people who insist they don't know why they did it. Detective Takabe becomes obsessed with finding a link, a search that leads him to a strange drifter whose presence seems to draw violence out of others. The deeper Takabe goes, the less certain he becomes about his own grip on reality. What makes Cure unforgettable is its atmosphere. Kurosawa creates horror not through sudden shock, but through silence, ambiguity, and the terrifying suggestion that evil isn't external, but dormant inside everyone. It's a film that unravels slowly, like hypnosis, leaving behind not answers, but questions about identity, free will, and the darkness waiting in the human mind. And I think that synopsis kind of perfectly captures anything that I could possibly say about it. Cure is fundamentally a movie about atmosphere, an atmosphere of horror and dread. As I was watching it, I was completely succumbed to those feelings. Just a bad sense in my bones, fingers, and muscles all over. And look, if you've made it this far into the video, you probably already know that Cure is a masterpiece, and you don't need me to recommend it to you by putting it at number 1 or something like that. But you might need a recommendation for Kurosawa's best movie, Chime, which, like Cure, accomplishes all of those things in 45 minutes. The dreadful atmosphere, the ambiguity of evil lurking inside the human soul of every single person, humans' capacity for violence, the strange unknowingness of the modern world. Chime is a movie that accomplishes everything that a film like Cure does, but for my money, it's just a little bit better because Kurosawa at this point in his career is at his best. A chime, something so banal, becomes a harbinger of death. While it is minor in terms of its length, it is major in terms of what it is able to condense into effective, chilling horror. So there you have it. Those are the Kiyoshi Kurosawa movie rankings. Now, admittedly, I did leave 2 films off of this list, 1 being Seance and 2 being Retribution. And the reason I left them off is because, well, I couldn't find them anywhere. I scoured the internet for all of these films, going to various sites and links that I normally wouldn't go to in order to watch movies, but Regardless, I still could not find those 2 movies, so please forgive me. All in all, there are about 30 Kurosawa feature films, not counting, of course, the serialized movies he made. He made early in his career, like Police Cop 1, Police Cop 2, like all the way 1 through 7. So he did a bunch of TV movies and stuff like that, but these are all of the major feature films. Let me know what you think. Let me know how many of these you've seen, which ones you like, which ones you love, which ones you hate. As always, if you're still watching this after like an hour, or I don't know how long this video is gonna be, thank you so much. I love you so much. Seriously, I appreciate you sticking around for it. Next week, I'm gonna be looking at the works of Paul Thomas Anderson in preparation for One Battle After Another. Stay tuned for that one. As always, I'm Any More. Peace.